Monday, December 15th, 7 p.m. inside the Bram Goldsmith Theater at the Wallace in Beverly Hills for Soul of the Holidays, a joyful night of Motor City soul, gospel, and holiday classics featuring an 18-piece band, all-star vocalist, and community choirs, all in support of the Black LA Relief and Recovery Fund. This performance comes at a pivotal time for many in Altadena and Pasadena. This is their first holiday season since the devastating Altadena Eden Canyon fire, which destroyed homes and community spaces. While the physical losses are immense, the power of community remains, and your attendance directly supports recovery, resilience, and renewal. So, be sure to join us Monday, December 15th, 7 p.m. inside the Bram Goldsmith Theater at the Wallace in Beverly Hills for Soul of the Holidays, benefiting survivors of the Altadena Eden Canyon fire. For ticket information, just log on to tickets@thewallace.org. That's tickets@thewallace.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580 and the Black Freedom Fund.
Get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Preacher man, don't tell me heaven is under the earth. I know you don't know what life is really worth. It's an all that
you are listening to the Black Pack here on KBLA Talk 1580. And we, have talked a lot about some of the most outrageous decisions made by the Trump administration since the beginning of the year. But something that we haven't actually had an opportunity to talk about, and I'm glad that we're going to have an opportunity to do it today, is about the targeted bombings that have been taking place in the Caribbean. And so I'm really excited to be joined by Jeep here, the national affairs correspondent at The Nation and host of the weekly podcast, The Time of Monsters, to sort of break this down and talk about it. So, Jeep, I want to thank you first of all for joining and helping us talk through, which is just sort of a crazy story that I feel like is out there, but I'm not sure that anyone actually understands what's going on.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely a crazy story, and it's been kind of curious because I and some other people have been kind of writing about it for a while now, but it was totally ignored by the political system. The Democrats hardly talked about it, but then suddenly in the last week, with this, video showing that there was a second strike, it's all become a big story. Yeah.
Right.
So
let's talk about that. Let's bring the listeners up to speed. So so in the last week, even though this has been happening for months now at this point, right? There's been a lot of back and forth, right? And closed door hearings, I guess, even in the last 24 hours, because we learned that the first strike, I guess, back in September, as you just said, there was a strike, and then there was a second strike. And so bring us up to speed on what has happened that turned this conversation, that even made Republicans say, I'm not sure about this.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think one thing to understand is that for better or worse, the American political system gives presidents a wide leeway in terms of military command, right? I'm honestly not sure that this is like legally right, because if you look at the Constitution, only Congress has the right to declare war. But I mean, it's just been the case that if you just look at American history, a lot of American presidents, particularly in like Latin America, have like just occasionally sent in the Marines or done stuff, and this is just like an accepted practice.
Right.
Whatever. We could. I mean, I think we should first flag that as like that's a big issue that nobody talks about. The second thing is that Trump decided to start bombing first in the Caribbean, but he's also bombed in the Pacific as well. Ships that are like off the coast of other nations or in international water. On the statement that these are engaged in drug smuggling, so-called narco-terrorism. The one thing to flag about that is that this is all just on his say-so. There's been no evidence provided by the government that this is, and this other thing is, even if they were smuggling drugs, like you normally don't respond to someone engaged in that sort of criminal activity by just blowing them up, right? Like
by just murdering them, right?
You intercede and arrest them. So I would say, from my point of view, like right from the start, there should have been like a kind of stink and people saying like, hey, wait a minute, this is like, this is like, it's a disgraceful criminal activity. Like, but as I said, a lot of leeway. But what has come out is that on that very first strike, I believe it's off the coast of Trinidad, they hit a ship, and there were survivors. And that apparently the order had been that you were supposed to kill everybody. So once they saw that there were these still two people alive, struggling on the to survive on the husk of the damaged ship, a second strike was ordered. Now, like you and I can both maybe agree that the whole thing is wrong, but other people would say, well, the president has a right to set foreign policy. But actually ordering the killing of not people that you think are engaged in like hostile activity in the U.S., but people who are like the struggling survivors, like that is like flat out a war crime. That is like like the murder. There's no question about that. That is in people will remember in World War II, after World War II, there were like the Nuremberg trials. There were German and Japanese commanders who were charged, convicted, and executed for what the United States did. Which is that they had like hit American ships. There were people who were survivors, and then they killed those survivors. It is a principle that the U.S. And other countries, it's accepted. Like you do not do that. So I think that that once this came out that this is what happened. Now I think the more interesting thing is, like, why did this come out? And I think this is more speculation rather than fact. But I don't think that something like this would come out unless there was a lot of concern within the military. And I think that, there's a lot of other indication and reporting that the military is not very happy with Pete Hegseth, with his sort of, and we see a back and forth of blaming, because Hegseth is now saying,
it wasn't me. After saying, that who cares? Well, Jeep, I want to get into this a little bit more, because there was also, there was a lot surrounding what happened this week, right? So there was the Democratic members of Congress who put out a video saying, if you're if you're in the military, you're an officer in the military, and you're asked to do something illegal, don't do it. And there was a little bit of like, why'd they put that video out, right? So I want to get into everything that happened around this week, and then also to the great piece that you wrote as well. So when we come forward, we're going to continue this conversation with Jeep Tier about what is happening in the Caribbean and whether or not the Trump administration is engaged in illegal activity when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us.
You're part of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580.
If you've been diagnosed with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis, this is what it sounds like to be a million miles away. Imagine being a million miles away. Tremfya Kuselkumab, taken by injection, is a prescription medicine for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis who may benefit from taking injections or pills or phototherapy. With Tremfya, clearer skin is possible. In clinical trials, at least 70% of patients saw at least 90% clearer skin at 16 weeks. Results may vary. Tremfya is also indicated for adults with active psoriatic arthritis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections and liver problems may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor about Tremfya. Call 1-800-526-7736 or visit tremfya.com.
Lena Bloom for the Bail Project.
Imagine you're stuck in a jail cell and you can't afford bail and someone offers you a way out. Just plead guilty and you can go home and kiss your kids goodnight. What do you do? What thousands have. You plead guilty whether you are or not. Cash bail makes poverty a crime. That's why the Bail Project helps those who can't afford it while fighting to end cash bail. Because freedom should be free.
Brought to you by the Ad Council.
KBLA Talk 1580 remembers Robin Ayers on the 1-year anniversary of her passing. 1 year ago this week, we lost a remarkable and vibrant voice. Robin Ayers touched countless lives through her passion, her love, her service, and her smile, which you could see through the radio. KBLA Talk 1580 honors her memory and celebrates the legacy she left behind. Robin, your spirit lives on in every conversation, in every connection, and in every one of us, inspired by your voice. Gone but never forgotten. KBLA Talk 1580, where voices matter.
I'm missing you. Tell me why the road turns. I'm missing you. Tell me why the road turns.
Let's get back to more of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
We are talking about the Trump administration's questionable and arguably illegal killing of people in the Caribbean with Jeep Terre, the national affairs correspondent at The Nation and host of the weekly podcast, The Time of Monsters. So, Jeep, we were talking about how this thing kind of unfolded this week. And to your point, you and many others have been reporting on this for months, right, since that first strike in September. And you know, we'd hear about it every so often. I mean, I feel like even in my own, social media feeds, like it felt like sort of a random, Pete Hegseth says, another 4 people have died, right, in a military strike. But it's been going on, and I think there's been like 80 or 90 people that have been killed in these strikes. And I feel like that is a stat that is not clear to people. This has not been like 1 or 2, right? There have been many. And this week, everything kind of began to come, crystallize in a way. No, go ahead.
Yeah, and I want to say that there's some interesting things that have been going on behind the scenes, which I think we can now see are related to this. And I think you mentioned the Democrats who have been former members of the military coming out with that video. But what's very interesting is that, back in October, a 4-star admiral, Alvin Holtzley, just a year into his turn, announced that he was retiring from that position. And he's the one who's sort of in charge of the Caribbean Command. And at that time, there was speculation this is someone, he's very young for an admiral. He's like 60 years old. As high in rank as it could be. Like, why would this guy be resigning at this time? And like, I have to say, obviously, Hegseth and Trump had been forcing a lot of people out. Halsey, like quite a few of the people that that have been made to resign. He's African American. But I think that now that this is connected with this kind of murder spree. That's like, Halsey felt that like the orders that he was given were not the ones he could carry out.
Through. I want to just stay on that for a second, because yes, like he resigns in October. This is after the first strike, but also after. I think it's after, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but also after Pete Hegseth's sort of bizarre TED Talk, right, to the entire, like he calls the entire, military leadership into Maryland or wherever they were, and basically says, get down with the warrior ethos or get gone. Right? If you can't do what I'm telling you to do, then you need to leave and also lose some weight or like whatever weirdness that he was on that day. But that happened too, right?
Yeah, which is exactly, and I think that particular event is, I think, one of the many signs that there's a kind of tension between Hegseth, the presidential appointee, and the military. That, like, he felt the need to sort of dress down the army and really just humiliate them. I mean, he took the entire American command, all the admirals and generals who are like serving all over the world, and brought them into the U.S. and had this lecture, which a lot of it was just about you need to like lose weight. I mean, I think that's a humiliation ritual,
right?
Frankly,
yes.
And I'm actually surprised more people haven't resigned. But I mean, I think the broader thing is that Hegseth. One reason for the tension is that Hegseth is a cultural warrior in charge of a military, and he's been trying to remake the military along his own image. So he has this idea that there's too much DEI, which means there's too many like women and people of color.
And black people.
He's been like purging trans members from the military. So I think that this is the sort of context for which I think we have to understand these sort of military strikes. That like Trump and Hegseth are remaking the military along their own image, and part of that means using them as their errand boy for this kind of. I think really, I mean, it's when I say play acting, like obviously real people have died, right? But I see this as a kind of like the theatrical thing that Trump is doing. It's similar to like the ICE raid. It's like it's a show of force. Like I'm the tough guy. I'm strong.
Right.
And the question is whether the military goes along with this or not.
Right. And I think that's so I'll bring us back up to these 6 members of Congress, all former military. Put out this video. They say if you're a member of our military and you're being told to carry out illegal orders, do not do it. Trump then melts down, right? Calls, says that they are treasonous, and that their crime should be punishable by death, for simply saying, what is their duty to do, right? It is their duty to disobey illegal orders. He melts down, and it was a little weird, like, what is happening? And then we learn about this second strike, right? Where there were non-combatants trying to survive, and a second strike was called. And they all sort of denied it. No, there wasn't a second strike, right? And then they were like, oh, actually, there was a second strike. But Pete Hegseth says, well, but it wasn't me, right? I'm not the admiral in charge. I delegated that responsibility to him. And now there's a little bit of, as you said, there's this tension now, right? Like there are some reports that in meetings with members of Congress that the admiral has said actually it was Hegseth, right? Like so now there's people are trying to get a story out that is both, I think, helping to, paint the full story, but also, is creating some confusion, right, about what did and didn't happen. But I want to talk about this both in terms of and I would love for you to respond to just like how this is, even again in the last 48 hours, how this is played out. But I also wanted to talk about, and for you to talk a little bit about the piece that you wrote titled "Donald Trump's Imperialism is Murdering People at Home and Abroad," that tries to bring a little bit of more sort of context to this of what's happening in the Caribbean, this sort of doctrine, right, of American foreign policy, right, that Donald Trump seems to be operating off of, and how this is happening in the Caribbean, but it's also happening here at home and in other places, and that it isn't that. I mean, I think what I took away from the piece was that it's important for us to not be looking at these things as isolated incidents, right, but as an actual theory, right, of how they carry out American foreign policy.
No, absolutely, yeah. I think the thing to understand is that they have a particular vision of American foreign policy, and you had mentioned that meeting of all the brass that Hegseth had brought over, and part of that meeting was also to promulgate this new grand strategy. Like the Pentagon periodically every few years issues a grand strategy of what its threats are, and in this new grand strategy, it was very notable that what they said was that we are not engaged in great power competition with Russia or even with China, which previously Trump had said, I'm the guy standing up to China. The main threat is in the homeland and in the Western Hemisphere. And I think that a lot of the things that Trump is doing, with trying to draw down in NATO, it really makes sense in the sense of this is a foreign policy. This is what's called isolationism, but is really we have to be the real enemy is at home, right? And from their point of view, the real enemy includes undocumented immigrants, but also people who don't agree with their political view. And so you want to have the National Guard being able to go into American cities at the president's behest for his agenda. You want to have sort of militarization of the border, and you want the U.S. to reassert its power and dominance over the Western Hemisphere. If you look at the more theoretical people involved with MAGA, people like Bannon, I mean, their basic point of the view of the world is that in some ways America is not quite the power it once was. It's not able to dominate the whole world, and that what would make sense now is to have spheres of influence. So you could have a sort of Russian sphere of influence in Europe, Chinese sphere of influence in the Pacific, and that America would get the Western Hemisphere. And one sees this not only in the sort of military strikes, but also in the sort of intervention in Latin American politics. That Trump, basically gave $20 billion in American money and raised another further $20 billion from private sources to bolster the government in Argentina so that they could win in the midterms, and that was successful. And he's also been intervening in the election in Honduras. And what you kind of see is, and then now there's also real moves afoot for regime change in Venezuela. And so what you kind of see is if this is a strategy that the U.S. has a sphere of influence, which is the Western Hemisphere, you want, Trump-friendly governments in those areas, and you want to be able to kind of dominate. And I think that to me, the whole narco-terrorism thing makes no sense, and especially the claims that Venezuela is the source of American cocaine and fentanyl. That's just factually not true at all. But I think what would make sense is what Bannon says. The Western Hemisphere is America's sphere of influence. This is our this is where we will dominate.
Yeah, this is fascinating because I think it really is about the sort of disruption of the whole post World War II kind of world order, right? And that and we can sort of see in the way that he's been operating, the way that he's been engaging with Russia, the way that he's been engaging with China, the idea that part of the U.S. sphere of influence being the Western Hemisphere also means that the U.S. has to subdue its own population, right? In order to be able to like control and dominate the Western Hemisphere. So I think it's really helpful. I'm glad that you sort of put that perspective there, because it does. I mean, I think that even in thinking about what we just talked about, like these things were happening, and then suddenly now that this this crisis point hit this week, it's like oh, so that's why that happened, right? Or oh, that's why they pulled every military leader from the world to America. You know what I mean? So so this, I think, is all that perspective that you just provided is also helpful in that, like, oh, okay, now I can see why Trump operates in this way or that way, the way that he deals with the Middle East, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that there is a real strategy. I mean, the one other thing I would tell listeners is, in some ways, this is like this is something that has deep roots. Like and it's often, I think, it confuses people because it's often wrongly described as isolationist, and it's not really isolationist. It's sort of Western Hemisphere, domination, or it's the spheres of influence. But going back to the early 20th century, like in the 20s and 30s, this was the foreign policy of the Republican Party, of like people like Herbert Hoover and Charles Lindbergh. Like the big debate back then was, should the U.S. intervene in Europe? And people like Hoover and Lindbergh said, no, like that's Europe. That's let Hitler have his sphere of influence in Europe. But they didn't mean that like America should just be like a Pacific country and not engage in war. They wanted to like keep military domination over the Western Hemisphere, to have what's the Monroe Doctrine. So the idea is let Hitler in the 30s, or Putin now, let them dominate there, and let us have our power here.
Yeah, this is a fascinating and great conversation with Jeep Thayer from The Nation, and Jeep is staying with us. we're gonna continue this conversation on the other side, because I think that again, it is you talked about it being sort of the form of new kind of American imperialism, and I want to get into that and what that means and what that looks like on the other side. Stay with us. This is KBLA Talk 1580.
More of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580 when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton with BIN News Now. The U.S. Supreme Court is allowing Texas to move forward with a new congressional map that favors Republicans, putting a lower court ruling on hold. That court had found the map violated law by factoring in race during redistricting. Governor Greg Abbott filed the emergency request to keep the map in place for now.
But the final word and the final outcome is going to be dependent on Texans.
Former Texas Congressman Colin Allred, who is black, says despite the ruling, the legal battle is far from over. Maryland's Black Attorney General Anthony Brown is praising House Speaker Adrianne Jones after she announced plans to step down. He called her a historic leader and a partner in progress, noting her legacy as Maryland's first woman and first black speaker. And Michael Jordan testified in a federal antitrust trial against NASCAR, calling it a monopoly. His team, 2311 Racing, refused to sign NASCAR's new revenue deal, saying it limits earnings. Get BIN News Now on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
In Bellflower, a stall on the northbound 605. You're going to come up on this as you pass Rosecrans. It's in a center lane. Everything moving fast here, so keep an eye out. Use a little extra caution as you come up. You're going to slow down afterwards anyway at Rosecrans. That delay is going to carry you up into Santa Fe Springs. A lot of red out there this evening. 110 southbound into Long Beach, 35 minutes from the 10 to the 405. And the 101 really stacked northbound out of downtown, almost an hour to the 405.
Right now, there are young people across the world facing a tough choice. Continue their dream of education or drop out to help their family put food on the table. You can help change their future in a single moment. See how far your support can go at unbound.org.
Is this the time? This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
A little more perspective on LeBron's double-digit scoring streak that came to an end Thursday night in Toronto. The streak ended at 1,297 consecutive games where LeBron scored 10 or more points. The streak started on January 6, 2007, when LeBron was in his fourth season in the NBA with Cleveland. The 1,297 is an NBA record that will likely never be broken. Michael Jordan had 866 straight games scoring in double figures during his 15-year career. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has 787. The longest current streak among active players is Kevin Durant with 267. Durant is 1,030 games behind LeBron. At age 37 and playing in his 18th season, it is doubtful Durant will be around to play that many games to catch LeBron. Stick a fork in this record. This is one record LeBron won't have to worry about after he retires, whenever that will be. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Celebrate the soul of the holidays and support Altadena and Pasadena. Join us on Monday, December 15th, 7 p.m. inside the Bram Goldsmith Theater at the Wallace in Beverly Hills for Soul of the Holidays, a joyful night of Motor City soul, gospel, and holiday classics featuring an 18-piece band, all-star vocalist, and community choirs, all in support of the Black LA Relief and Recovery Fund. This performance comes at a pivotal time for many in Altadena and Pasadena. This is their first holiday season since the devastating Altadena Eden Canyon fire, which destroyed homes and community spaces. While the physical losses are immense, the power of community remains, and your attendance directly supports recovery, resilience, and renewal. So, be sure to join us Monday, December 15th, 7 p.m. inside the Bram Goldsmith Theater at the Wallace in Beverly Hills for Soul of the Holidays, benefiting survivors of the Altadena Eden Canyon fire. For ticket information, just log on to tickets@thewallace.org. That's tickets@thewallace.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580 and the Black Freedom Fund.
Days after the Eaton fire devastated entire neighborhoods in Pasadena and Altadena, Black Freedom Fund, an organization that invests in leaders and organizations transforming Black communities, established the Black LA Relief and Recovery Fund. The Black LA Relief and Recovery Fund is supporting local organizations, providing direct resources to families, and making sure that recovery reflects the needs and voices of the people who live there. For many, the journey to rebuild is just beginning, and the Black Freedom Fund is committed to being with them every step of the way. Stand with Dina. Donate by texting Black LA to the number 707070. That's Black LA to 707070. Together, we can help our neighbors rebuild their homes, lives, and hope. The Black Freedom Fund is proud to sponsor Conversation Live, Altadena Rising, with James Farr on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminds you that we keep us safe. Every girl deserves a chance to shine. That's the belief behind Forgiving for Living, Inc. Since 1999, this organization has been empowering at-risk girls ages 13 to 18, helping them overcome behavioral and mental health challenges. Founder Wendy Gladney's personal journey inspired the mission to give girls hope and purpose through the power of forgiveness. Through their ambassador program, workshops, and annual conference, Forgiving for Living has touched over 3,000 young lives, providing mentoring, life skills, training, and tools for building self-esteem and confidence. You can make a difference. Visit forgivingforliving.org to donate, volunteer, become a mentor, or find help for a young girl in need. Forgiving for Living, Inc., building brighter futures for young girls. Visit forgivingforliving.org today. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
You're inside the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580.
And we are so lucky to have Jeep Taylor, the national affairs correspondent at The Nation and host of the weekly podcast, The Time of Monsters, with us to talk about Trumpism on the international stage and the likely illegal killings of people on boats in the Caribbean. So, Jeep, I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned in the last part of our conversation, and that that was about the way in which, I don't even know. Do we still call it the war on drugs? I don't know what it's called anymore. I guess it's called narco-terrorism or whatever. But you sort of mentioned that. And so will you just talk a little bit more about that in the way that, it's being used as a pretense, right, for the U.S. to sort of assert itself in the region. We talk about those connections, and because there's both this sort of like this focus on fentanyl, right, and the impact of fentanyl on Americans and Americans' lives, but I don't think fentanyl has anything to do with necessarily, right, with who they are suggesting and what they are suggesting is coming on boats through the Caribbean.
No. I will say, like the opioid crisis is a very serious thing.
Mm-hmm.
It has, wrecked, many families, many communities, like in the United States and elsewhere. But I mean, the origins of that are really in the pharmaceutical companies and their decision to sell very powerful painkillers, which got a lot of people addicted. I mean, that's if one were seeing a war on drugs, none of those people have ever been charged.
Right.
So, but I don't want to downplay the seriousness of drugs. But in terms of American foreign policy, there is a kind of two-faced thing that one has always seen. One of which is that drugs are kind of easy way to scapegoat other countries and to blame other countries. And to justify American military intervention. So, the classic war on drugs, I mean, it's very significant. It was declared by Richard Nixon in the early 70s as the U.S. was getting into trouble in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And in some ways is a way to re-justify American military interventions, particularly in Latin America. And so, you had the Americans military being used to destroy drug fields, but also American training of military forces in Latin America. But paradoxically, the fact is that a lot of this activity also helped militarize the drug trade. That and some of, the sort of, horrible cartels, the one sees in Mexico, a lot of their military weapons and military training came from people who were trained by the United States government. Mm-hmm. And there has also been, this is very well documented in congressional records. The American, national security state, the more secret elements like the CIA often find the drug trade as a very convenient way that, they can allow them to infiltrate other societies, allow them to raise money without congressional approval. Going back to the Vietnam War, where the heroin trade coming out of Laos, the big jump in heroin use in the United States was coming from an American CIA operation, Air America, which got involved with the heroin trade to make alliances with tribal groups in Laos and brought heroin into the U.S., going forward into the 1980s with the cocaine trade in the America, which again, there was a heavy involvement with the American national security state. And going forward, really, the war in Afghanistan, where the biggest producers of heroin in the 21st century were American allies in Afghanistan. Right. And some of which came through America through places like Fort Bragg. So it's hard not to see this as a very cynical policy, right, where drugs are both used to, justify to the population militarism, we're fighting drugs, but then also we're working with these drug dealers. And one can't help but notice that Trump, even as he's they're blowing up, these ships, who knows who's on them, he just pardoned the former president of Honduras, right, who was actually convicted in court of, smuggling in hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cocaine into the U.S.
Right. And so that's, I was gonna raise that, because there's both the whatever, the hypocrisy and irony and all of that of it, right? While you're talking about the need for us to control, the flow of drugs from Latin America, and then you are pardoning or whatever, right? A known drug trafficker, right? Who we can speculate, right, about, kind of what was the relationship with the Trump administration and then during the first, during Trump 1. But it's that kind of, I think that sort of hypocrisy that it feels like, while the mainstream media may have noted it, right, there was no sort of outrage, right?
Yeah. No, and I don't even see it, like, from their point of view, I don't even see it as hypocrisy. I mean, like, I think the main goal is power, is domination, and both things are like quite useful. Both, like, in terms of saying that you're fighting a war on drugs, which allows you to get a lot of money for policing, but also for the military. The U.S. military has been used, but then also occasionally working with drug dealers to help you dominate those societies. I mean, like, he's pardoned. Like, Trump has been trying to interfere in the election in Honduras, and the pardon is clearly related to that, to get some sort of sway or influence with political groups in Honduras. So I just think like, if you see the bottom line of both policies as like domination, then they kind of make sense.
Right. But this is the hard part, I think, for our listeners, with folks who are trying to pay attention to what's happening, right? Because, the news is all just overwhelming, right? This has sort of been kind of front and center this week. But it's hard to connect all these dots, right? To get a clear picture on what exactly is happening and what does it mean for us here. So I'm saying that because I'm appreciating you connecting those dots for people, including this idea that, and again, and going back to your piece about this sort of military dominance, in the region, but also military dominance here in the U.S., right? This idea of like turning the United States military's focus, right, internally, toward American citizens, which again, appreciate the sort of perspective that it's all a part of this kind of broader scheme, and that, like, we probably all remember Iran-Contra and Ollie North, right? Or Oliver North, I guess I should say. But we forget about Afghanistan, right? We forget about Vietnam. And so I think we've been talking the entire show about kind of historical perspective, and the importance of having historical perspective, particularly right now when things feel so very complicated.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I do think that, like, I think the stuff that Trump and Hegseth are doing, I have no problem saying that they're criminal, but I actually think that, like, to understand how they're able to do this and why they're, it took so long for the Congress even to raise a stink, you have to understand that there was an infrastructure that was built. There was a system that was built, and it was built not by Trump, but, it was built by Nixon. It was built by George W. Bush. And it's the twin infrastructure of the war on drugs and the war on terrorism. This is why it's called, narco. They're using this phrase narco-terrorism. And they're even making these outlandish claims that, like, drugs from Venezuela are going to Africa to fund jihadi groups and then going to Europe, right?
Right.
Create which seems like it's a total fiction, but it's used to give a national security rationale to this idea. But once you have that infrastructure put into place, where Congress has authorized presidents to wage a war on drugs and wage a war on terrorism, then someone like Trump can come along and use it for his own purposes, which I think are very dark purposes.
Right, very dark purposes. People are dead in the Caribbean, and we don't actually know who they are. So we're gonna continue this conversation with Jeep when we come forward. I do want to come back to sort of the spheres of influence that you talked about, and particularly about Europe and some comments that the Trump administration said this week, I think, about Europe losing its culture, and what the connection is to all of that. So more when we come forward. Stay with us. This is KBLA Talk 1580.
You're part of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580.
September is World Alzheimer's Month, a time to shine a light on a public health crisis that deeply impacts Black families. 1 in 5 Black adults ages 70 and older is living with Alzheimer's disease, or AD, and the risk is twice as high compared to white adults. But AD isn't just forgetting a name or losing track of time. Signs of early AD could be repeating questions, missing appointments, or struggling with bills and daily tasks. These things aren't a normal part of aging. Here's the good news. Treatments are available that may help if AD is diagnosed early. If you notice changes in memory or daily routines, whether in yourself or a loved one, don't wait. Early diagnosis and intervention are key to managing AD effectively. To learn more about AD and a potential treatment option, visit treatalsearly.com. That's treatalzearly.com to learn more about the signs and symptoms and a potential treatment option. This message is brought to you by AZI.
The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in more places that could expose you more to identity theft. But LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our US-based restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Don't face drained accounts, fraudulent loans, or financial losses alone. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year with promo code NEWS. Visit lifelock.com. Terms apply.
The only thing between you and your best self is the start button. This Cyber Monday, explore the world with Nordic Track. From the peaks of Peru to the streets of Paris, every workout moves you somewhere new with iFit trainers leading the way. The equipment's amazing, smooth, quiet, and those screens make it all feel real. Ready to start your next workout adventure with the #1 treadmill brand in the US? Shop NordicTrack.com for Cyber Monday savings. Nordic Track. Train anywhere, explore everywhere.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Worried about eviction? You have rights, and Stay Housed LA can help. Stay Housed LA is a partnership between LA County, the City of Los Angeles, and local service providers. From Lancaster to Long Beach, we're here to help you with tenant education workshops, legal clinics, free legal services for eligible tenants, and online resources about tenant protection laws. Don't face eviction alone. Call our hotline at 1-888-694-0040. That's 1-888-694-0040. Or visit stayhousedla.org. Stay Housed LA, keeping Los Angeles residents in their homes. Stay Housed LA, your rights, your home, our community. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to more of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
We are wrapping up our conversation with Jeep Terr, the national affairs correspondent at The Nation. And Jeep, I wanted to talk a little bit about, clearly America First means, not just a domestic policy, but an international policy too. And we know that, all of the sort of fixation that Trump himself, right, and the administration has in Europe and with our European allies, and fixation doesn't necessarily mean a good thing, right? It often means terrible, eroding relationships with those allies. But this week they sort of went on this. Everything seems like a rant or a tirade or something about how Europe is losing its civilization, and it as we've been talking, it made me think about, obviously this idea of dividing the world up again, right? And who is to be responsible for the European peace? I guess that's Russia. But this idea, the relationship between what needs to happen militarily in the European region, and this idea about, which I think is, you said earlier that Pete Hegseth is a culture warrior, right? And this also seems to be a part of what they throw into the mix, right? In when they talk about what is happening in Europe and why Europe is failing and it's going to be whatever hyperbolic phrasing that Trump uses. But this week, when I heard as we've been talking, and I thought, oh, this is a part of their Europe is falling, right? Is this idea that it's losing its civilization, or am I reaching here? Am I stretching that there's a connection between that and
this is all part of the same kind of message. And particularly, I mean, I think there's this new national security strategy that I think just came out today, and it's pretty startling. I mean, like, they are basically calling for the U.S. Even to both militarily withdraw from Europe. They want the Europeans to take care of their own defense, but also that what the U.S. should be doing is supporting right-wing governments, what they call patriotic governments within Europe.
Wow.
And I think the idea
I did not
is
see that.
Like,
so.
It's in line with the sort of sphere of influence. Like, you want America in the Western Hemisphere, and you want Europe in Europe, and they are, encouraging kind of anti-immigrant, xenophobic governments in Europe. I mean, this goes back a long ways. I mean, Steve Bannon has long sort of, cultivated ties with people like Marine Le Pen, and Viktor Orban, and so they do kind of have this. Elon Musk, said something to the effect, it's best if, the Japanese stay in Japan, the Italians stay in Italy, which is amazing. If you look at Musk's own history, being this white South African, who came to Canada and then the U.S. But in any case, it's for me, for my fellow wealthy elite, we can go anywhere, but we want everyone else to kind of
stay wherever you're supposed to be at.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the, so I think this, when we think about that, right. And I have not seen the whatever got released in terms of sort of national security strategy, but is this idea of supporting right-wing governments, which we have seen, as you said, increasingly, members of this administration, including Musk, when he was a member of the administration or whatever, going to Europe and showing support for right-wing parties. When we think about what they're doing here, it does. And I know that we've talked about before on the show this idea of this sort of consolidation of global white supremacy in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, speak to that, because it feels like
what Bannon himself says. I mean, he says the U.S. should be aligned with Russia, not opposed to Russia, because Russia is a white Christian country, right? And
and if it wants to assert its dominance, then we should let that happen, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So so
that the real threat in Europe are the immigrants, are the Syrian refugees, and that's what they should be focused on rather than Putin. And just as a real threat here are immigrants and people who protest the government. So it is sort of bringing a kind of cultural war politics. We're fighting the enemy at home, and then we can divide up the world into spheres of whichever great power has the most muscle in its region.
And so focus on immigrants, because if Putin wants to roll tanks into Poland, then that's just going to be what has to happen. So one of the things that we don't talk about international affairs much on this show, but this is one of those things, just what we've seen in the last this past week with what's happening in the Caribbean, these sort of extrajudicial killings. It does feel like, for folks who often think that international politics are not relevant, right, to themselves and to their families and their communities, and to be fair, right, Americans are dealing with a lot right now, right, in terms of trying to survive. But what do you say to folks? I mean, because I think this is kind of the perfect conversation to see how all of this is connected, and why it's important to at least keep some attention, if everyone's totally divided attention, but to keep some attention on what's happening internationally. What do you say to folks who feel like that's all just a bridge too far?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the key thing to understand is that for Trump and these other people, the foreign and domestic, that's not the categories, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
It is, they want a domination over a particular space, and they will want to fight their enemies at home and abroad, right? And in fact, their national security strategy, it is, Pete Hegseth said, we want the military to be focused here. So I think that there is a deep kind of connection between this kind of like Darwinist view of the world. You want a Darwinist, the struggle between these powers in the world, or allowing the strong nations to dominate, with the sort of what they're doing at home. They're two sides of the same coin. They all absolutely go together, and I think in a lot of ways, you have to be fighting both if you want to get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't have. You can't secure the liberty and prosperity of Americans with the kind of Darwinist world that they're creating. Like, it's just going to the war. They have brought the war home.
Right.
This is the big slogan of the New Left: bring the war home. Well, Trump has brought the war home in a very different way.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that you were not totally surprised, or that you were not totally surprised to see the kind of militarization that's happening in our cities right now. The sort of Black Hawk helicopters hovering over apartment buildings in Chicago. Right?
Yeah. No. I mean, they absolutely go together. I mean, this is one. I mean, I think one thing maybe listeners can relate to is the sort of Palestine issue, and the way in which the sort of one reason why Israel is an ally is that it's very useful research and development. It's what they call the Palestine Laboratory. That the sort of technologies of repression that one develops there, are very useful at home. And, one sees, like IDF soldiers being brought into like American police forces to train American soldiers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So I mean, it's all the same struggle.
Yeah. And I wanted to just to sort of lift that up, because I think that it is important that, to sort of acknowledge, right, that these things are not, they have never been, right, separate in the way that, I think Americans sometimes, silo, right, what's happening politically. And it's never been that way. And it's not that way now, right, that these things are.
Yeah. But increasingly it's becoming, increasingly the war has come home, right? Like, increasingly, they have always been linked, but I think that the linkages are becoming very visible now with a kind of, domestic militarization.
Yeah.
And so, all the sort of technologies of drones, helicopter strikes, AI, one of the values, again, of Gaza was, developing AI technology for this warfare, and then that will absolutely be used on the home front.
That's right, and it's sooner probably rather than later. Okay, Jeep Tear from The Nation, I want to thank you so much. This was really great. I appreciate everything that you brought to this conversation. I'm sure that people learned a lot, and so I appreciate your time and would love to have you back as all of this unfolds before our very eyes every day. And thank you all for joining me here at the Black Pack with our guests. We'll be back, of course, next Friday, 4 to 6 p.m. right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Enjoy your weekend.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Amber Payton with BIN News Now. Staten Island is getting nearly $30 million for park and public space upgrades as part of Black New York City Mayor Eric Adams' latest budget. The Staten Island Zoo will receive $8 million, with more going to Snug Harbor and the Staten Island Museum. This may be Adams' final visit to the borough while in office. A federal appeals court is blocking a Trump administration move to stop a Biden-era grant aimed at hiring school mental health workers. The 2022 grants focused on helping